And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. Spartan Stadium, Michigan State continuing football camp. Today, the first day in full pads. They were in shoulder pads for 2 or 3 days prior to today. Full pads today. We were out there. We watched some of it. Defensive coordinator Scotty Hazelton spoke with us, as well as Deron Reynolds, defensive line coach, and some defensive linemen. A lot of the themes continue. These guys are excited about their depth, the improved size, and all those things in those scrimmage this weekend. Hazelton talked in terms of comparing to last year. And he talked a little bit about last year, but said he didn't want to talk about much of that because those days are gone. He feels like they learned from it. But, of course, last year, 27 different starters because of injuries and attrition and so forth. But the big theme, in addition to the improved size and guys, guys that were already big getting bigger and building into their frame, is the depth and where the rubber meets the road on the depth piece of it. Specifically, some of the players talked about how important it was to them last year to not have depth behind them and how they would wear down. They're excited that they've got people behind them pushing them, and Hazelton's excited about having tall guys in the meeting room and rolling out numbers. It's real, people. Michigan State feels good about that defensive front and the competition throughout. Whether or not that gets, honed in and sharpened into good quality football team that can come out and win a lot of games against that schedule remains to be seen. But there is optimism, and it's real, and it's because they're excited about the number of bodies and the size of those bodies and the capabilities, especially in that defensive front, talked about again today.
Yeah, and I filmed the defensive line, and that film was on the message board. But just standing there and watching those guys go through the drills, I can't remember a group collectively that looked physically all airport team-ish as good as that defensive line group looked. Usually there's like a handful of walk-ons and guys that don't look the part. Every single guy in that D-line deal looked the part, where you could say, yeah, this guy looks like a D1, which you would typically expect a D1 defensive lineman to look like. Whether that, you're talking about whether that equates to being a real good defense or not, we don't know about that. But I will say this: without being able to stop the run, there's no way in the world you can have a good defense. And without having the size on the inside, the experience on the inside, and just personnel capable of stopping the run, you're not going to have a good defense. So I think that's a good foundation, a good place to start. I honestly thought Michigan State was going to have some decent pieces last year to stop the run. Injuries. Maybe some guys not developing the way I expected them to, like a Jalen Hunt, for example. I thought he was going to be better as an interior defensive lineman than he ended up being. But this year you're looking at, not just a three-guy group of interior guys to take all the reps. You're looking at a bunch of different guys that have playing experience, but quality interior line depth for guys like Jalen Sami, the newcomer from Colorado, Simeon Barrow coming back, Maverick Hansen, Derek Harmon. All those guys are legitimate Big Ten starters, and there's very few programs in the country that can say that they've got guys with that kind of size and skill set coming back as the anchors of their defensive line. It's just really rare in today's climate.
Sami said he's never had a defensive line that deep, right? Tumise said it was really strong also, the transfer from Texas A&M. Before I go any further, if you're not a subscriber to SpartanMag.com, get over there, check it out. We'd love to have you as a subscriber. I think you can subscribe for 1 month. I think it's $9 or so. I should know that for sure, but I don't. Try it for a month. You'll love it. If you're watching this and you love Michigan State football, you'll love SpartanMag.com. Go give it a try. Also, subscribe to this channel. Give us a like. We appreciate that as well. You spoke with Jalen Sami. It's the first time he's done interviews here. He just transferred in from Colorado. Mel Tucker coached him for 1 year in 2020, and when he hit the portal, Tucker said that his staff didn't walk to the portal to get him. They ran. They wanted him immediately, and he's already meshed well with his teammates. Your thoughts about Sami today?
I mean, you hear Deron Reynolds, defensive line coach, referring to Sami as an alpha, in that meeting room. You have guys like Derek Harmon. You're talking about how he's making him better because he's able to pick up some things, having all that experience. So Sami's an interesting guy. 6'6", 340. Watching him do some drills today, he's surprisingly light on his feet. He's got a reputation as a run stopper. He feels like he has a little bit more wiggle than that he can also be a pass rusher, but he hasn't been able to show that because every year that he's played at Colorado, he's played at least 50 snaps a game on defense, and that's not conducive, if you're a defensive tackle, to being able to go 100 miles an hour. That's not exclusive to Sami. Derek Harmon was doing the same thing last year. Maverick Hansen, Simeon Barrow, they're both all playing too many snaps, but it's really kind of, on the one hand, kind of sad, the experience that he's had in college football to this point. Sami's a guy that's been around for 6 years, but he's had 9 different defensive line coaches, 5 different head coaches. When he went in the portal, one of the first things he did was call Jaron Mangum, the running back transfer from South Florida, who started out at Colorado as one of his friends at Colorado, and said, hey, what's the vibe like here? And then he started doing his homework because he felt like he wanted to go to a program that, A, had depth, so he wasn't playing 50 to 60 snaps on defense. He wanted to go to a program that had a good defensive line coach, so he started doing his research on guys like Dyron Reynolds, and he talked to some people he knew in the Pac-12. Dyron Reynolds came from Stanford, so he had all the things lined up there. But then he started on his visit. He was able to kind of on his official visit, he was able to kind of mesh with Derek Harmon and realize that these guys all had kind of common goals. Everyone was going to be rowing in the same direction, and everyone was like kind of excited about having a deep room, and he's fit right in, and these guys have embraced him, and he's embraced these guys, and I think he's really excited about the opportunity he has to do his thing, but do it to the best of his ability without having to take plays off to conserve energy. And I think that's a sentiment today we heard time and time again from every single interior defensive lineman that was out there for interviews.
And today, we were able to talk a little bit more about some other developmental aspects. Spoke with Dyron Reynolds a little bit about, I asked him about Chris Bogle, who played the first 4 games last year, coming off the bench. He was a second stringer at Florida, too, has 8 or 9 career sacks at Florida. Only played 4 games, lost to the season against Minnesota, I think it was, lower body injury, and he mentioned that he's close to getting back to full speed. I wasn't necessarily sure whether or not he was. I know he didn't play in the spring scrimmage, but I wasn't sure where that was, but there's some optimism there. And he played strong against the run last year, a guy that I thought would have a real good chance to be a starter defensive end at some point this year. Zion Young is back, played a lot as a true freshman last year, a long, lean guy that they say is getting better as a pass rusher because he's got some slipperiness to him. We didn't see the pass rush piece of his game last year. He was a true freshman just trying to survive. He survived and then some. Zion Young is going to compete there for defensive end job for sure. Brandon Wright's still around. Avery Dunn is around. Tumisi Adelaide, the transfer from A&M, is expected to really compete there. Reynolds says, hey, we've got a lot of defensive ends. By Job, Andrew DePape, a couple of freshmen. He was asked about By Job a little bit. And reading between the lines and also some of the things he was talking about, Job is a guy that he says, I can't remember exactly what adjective he used in terms of the pass rush skill, but it's for real and it's uncommon. Not a guy that's going to be an every down thing, every down player this year, I wouldn't think, physically and just in terms of knowing everything. Plus there's a lot of competition. But they hinted or maybe came out and said that if he can handle a pass rush role, someone who just has one trick, as they say, they could make some use of that. So By Job, I think, is going to try to prove himself capable of handling that. The next step to that is getting it done in the scrimmage on Saturday, which we will not be able to see, and we might hear a little bit about it. But there's a lot of moving pieces there in that defensive front, including defensive end. They're going to need some pass rush out of somebody. There's a lot of sturdy bodies up there, but I'm not sure there's that real one tremendous edge threat. Maybe Adelaide can become that guy. Bogle's done it in the past if he's healthy. Job a little bit. Jacoby Windman on third down. By committee, they could use that. But if that piece comes along, then that front 6 or 7 really has everything covered, I would imagine, if they stay healthy.
I think the one thing to think about is we talk about like pass rusher and stuff like that. You can't really get to a place where you can put By Job in a pass rush situation unless you're like third or 5 or longer. And one of the big takeaways from today, and I liked the way the defensive line coach was talking. I liked the way Scotty Hazelton was talking about, starting with stop the run and then build everything out. I felt like last year at times with the guys that they had coming in, there's a lot of talk about we have to get better at pass rush. And I agree, they had to get better. But one of the reasons why they weren't good at pass rush, or one of the reasons why they couldn't get a guy like By Job on the field if they had him, is because you can't really put a guy like that on the field in 3rd and 3. or 3rd and 2, where it's a 50-50 run or pass type down. So for Michigan State to get a guy like a by Job out there, they've got to do a better job on 1st and 2nd down. Similar to in 2021, I think they were able to get some pass rushers out there. They were able to get guys out there that maybe weren't great against the run because they were able to get some 3rd and long situations. So to me, it starts with stopping the run and then doing some things. And if they can get, if they can slow them down, like stone them on 1st down,
which they should do better.
They should, absolutely. If you can stop the run, you should have 3rd and 5s and 3rd and 9s and that type of thing. And if if you can do that, then you can mix and match personnel. Then you can get young guys up to speed as pass rushers. But I think that's kind of where it starts.
And that's what Hazelton said. That was also step one to getting more interceptions. Last year, unthinkable that Michigan State only had 2 interceptions the entire season. Did a good job knocking the ball loose for fumbles. Right. And he was asked about that in the spring as well. And a lot of it comes down to those. It's a domino effect. If you stop the run, get a lead in a game, put teams in 3rd and long, that's when the interceptions come. That being said, it's not like they dropped a lot of interceptions either. They didn't really have a lot of chances.
They don't really have a lot of chances to create interception opportunities with the personnel that they had out there. You look at after the suspensions, they took away so many of the defensive linemen and injuries early, but you don't have Jacoby Windman out there. You're one legitimate pass rusher. You've got defensive tackles working as defensive ends. And it's not conducive to forcing a lot of interceptions. There wasn't a lot of one-dimensional teams out there. Mm-hmm. Michigan State wasn't scoring on offense. The defense was doing some good things in the red zone with a bend but don't break. But if you're not, if teams are running the football on you and they're throwing the football on you, good luck with those interceptions.
Yeah, it seems strange for a Michigan State defense that is ranked outside the top 100 in total defense the last 2 years for us to sit here talking about defense. And today it was all defensive interviews, but to talk about defense in terms of from an optimistic angle, but I think there is reason for optimism there. First of all, stay healthy. Secondly, they've got a lot of returning guys that have matured. But I think this defense could go from last year being terrible for understandable reasons to not just being adequate, but better than adequate, and a defense that's quite good. Maybe not a defense that's going to stop Michigan or Ohio State. I mean, you're talking about 2 of the maybe 3 best teams in the country, but maybe they've pulled up and beaten Michigan in the past in those circumstances. But that would be nice if you're a defense, if you could handle those teams, and it's a very short list of teams across the country that can do that. More importantly, can you stifle Iowa? Can you contain Penn State? And Washington is going to come in here scoring 45 against everybody again.
Washington is going to be like, people are going to freak out with the outcome of that game and how many points that Washington puts up. But that Washington, that's a powerhouse. They've got a ton of talent. They've got one of the best offensive minds in the game, and Kellen DeBoer running the show. They've got tremendous skill personnel coming back. I think that's one of the toughest matchups that Michigan State is going to face. But in terms of getting to the place where Michigan State needs to get, winning games against teams in your peer group, it starts with stopping the run. Michigan State not only has a quality interior defensive line, they've got a quality front 7. The linebackers, those guys are all good. And I'm really interested to see what Jacoby Windman can do as a linebacker. Having the entire offseason to kind of get acclimated to that. Aaron Brule is a guy that came on at the end of the season. He showed a lot of growth towards the end of the season. Cal Halliday is a guy that should benefit tremendously from having a good interior defensive line. So the front,
and he's added some thickness to himself also.
Absolutely, and the front 7 is where it's at. And if you have a good front 7, then you can get away with. You don't have to be perfect in the back end. And Michigan State's going to have, some growing pains, but they've got guys that have had some experience. They've got some talent. They've got a lot of bodies. But we've seen in the past from good Michigan State teams during the D'Antonio era where there were some holes in the secondary, but they still got it done because the front 7 was intact. And if you don't have a good front 7, you can't play average or above average pass defense.
Hazelton had an interesting quote about communication in the back end. And the day that Snow and Henderson were injured, I think against Akron, I asked Mel Tucker, what's that going to do to your communication? And he didn't want to expose any weaknesses or anything. Right. He kind of dodged the question a little bit, which is understandable. But here, 12 months later, comes out a little bit when Hazelton says, communication really broke down when they didn't have Xavier Henderson on the field. He was so good at communicating that they relied on him so much that when he wasn't there, they really missed that. He says this year, in terms of communication in the back end, it's more of 4 voices rather than one. And he says his quote today was, "We sound like a football team out there. Someone's communicating. They're communicating back and forth. They're helping. That should help, you would think, get on the same page." Now, there's a lot of youth back there, but it's talented youth. When you look at Mangum and Malik Spencer, Dylan Tatum, wherever he lands, Charles Brantley's still a young guy. It's his 3rd year. He's been around for a while, but still getting acclimated as a leader. What goes on there at corner? You were talking with Dylan Tatum the other day. He says he's competing for a job. A lot of us may have thought that he ended the season last year as a starting corner against Penn State. He's most likely to have that this season, and they're excited about him as a player, but maybe that's not his natural position. Maybe there's some others moving up. Caleb Coley's moving up. He's going to be looked at. We don't know what Terry Roberts is going to look like, the transfer in from Iowa. There's competition there. Ade Willie might be a slot guy, but they're getting that jumbled around, and like Hazelton said, they're looking to see who plays well with whom, and they're looking forward to seeing who's going to win those jobs. There are job openings. There are real competitions. There are third stringers that are still vying and competing, and they're all getting a look. And I don't know what it looks like specifically, but it's different, Paul. It's different in terms of the numbers and people that they feel are capable and equipped. Now, whether or not you get some game changers in there, Winmon, possibly as a linebacker, if you get teams a negative down and distance and get a lead on somebody. Simeon Barrow is a difference maker, defensive tackle also. And you talked about players today. Simeon Barrow was not out here today, but specifically what it means to those guys to have depth behind them and how they had to conserve themselves last year. Something we've talked about for years, but some of those players spoke to that today about how they had to conserve last year.
Yeah, one thing before I touch on that, I'll go back to the communication. When Jim Salgado, the cornerbacks coach, was brought in, one of the things that he was really focused on during the spring was corners communicating with safeties, not just listening to what the safeties were saying and just kind of doing their thing, but he wanted real, tangible back and forth communication. So he'd stand there in the defensive backfield, which is kind of weird for a lot of those guys that are in the sideline, but he wanted to be right up close and personal to where those guys were so he could hear them communicating. And so I think that's when you put like a really big emphasis on something, you tend to get a return, but he's really big as a cornerbacks coach on the communication at the defensive back position, and I think that's kind of that's paying off a little bit. The other thing about the competition that you just mentioned, Hazelton was talking about Sean Brown, the true freshman from California, from Simi Valley, 6'3", 190-pound corner. He's got a background as a safety, but they've thrown him in with the ones. They've thrown Chance Rucker, true freshman corner, in with the ones. That doesn't mean those guys are going to play with the ones, but they're doing a nice job trying to get those guys mix and match, let everybody know, the veterans, that your job isn't safe, but they also want to get a look and see what corners can do. And we've seen over the years, like Harlan Barnett's coach secondaries, lots of times freshmen play at the corner position, if they're ready to do it. You think of Darquez Denard, and there's a lot of other examples of that. But going back to, again, on the defensive tackle depth, guys like Derek Harmon said last year that was his first really, as a sophomore. Was he a redshirt freshman last year? Second-year player, redshirt freshman. But as a redshirt freshman, he played 40 to 50 snaps a game or something like that. And he said, he had never played before at Michigan State or the college level. He thought that was normal. He didn't realize that it was a problem until talking to some of the older guys like Simeon Barrow, who was admitting to him that, hey man, I'm taking some plays off, or I'm conserving some energy. I'm trying to wait for the right moment to make my thing happen. And I think Maverick Hansen alluded to the same thing today. But now with the improved depth, with Sami coming in, Alex Van Summer and making some strides. You've got some other transfers in. I'm not sure what the outlook is there, but they're bodies. They're big bodies, and they're there to compete. And you've got guys that know that they do not have to, conserve energy. They don't have to drive at 55 miles an hour on the expressway to make sure they get to the next exit. Yeah. So that's a real big deal, because you and I both know, when it comes to defensive line, when it comes to big 300-pounders, once those guys expend everything they've got, it's really, really hard to kind of re-energize and pick back up. So they've experienced what it's like to play through fatigue in really difficult situations. Now they're starting to get a feel for what it's like to cut it loose. And I think that's one of the things, my takeaways from today's interviews, talking to the players and hearing what Dyron Reynolds had to say. Reynolds is a guy that wants you to give everything you got and spill it out there and get picked up by your teammates
and come out.
But it's refreshing, I think, for a lot of these guys to hear. We want you to give max effort all the time, and we'll find a way to to replace you in an effective manner. Not like, hey man, you need to hold out this long or whatever and save it until the red zone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Michigan State was doing by necessity far too often last year.
Maverick Hansen said there'd be times like, I don't know if I'm going to be out here for 6 or 7 plays, and if I empty my gas tank right now, then you're taking on a double team in the red zone. So you end up, like Hazelton said, you put a governor on yourself, and you can't be your best version of yourself. Now, after Slade was hurt, that kind of, you're down to 3 defensive tackles. They tried Van Sumeren, wasn't quite ready to be a defensive maker. They shut him, difference maker. They shut him off after 4 games to preserve redshirt status. Ended up with just those 3 at 2 positions for a defense that couldn't get off the field. And you've not seen the best of Simeon Barrow yet. You've not seen the best of Harmon yet.
Right.
These guys will be going 100% a little bit more. Now, there's some opponents that'll play fast that might not allow you to sub out, but when you get a chance to sub out, then you bring in Hansen,
right,
or Sami and Van Sumeren. That's going to be the strength of the defense in front of Halliday and Winmon, a tag team that we only saw play maybe once against Michigan. That's going to be interesting to see what Halliday and Winmon look like. There's a lot of experience there, a lot of leadership, and those guys have some size, and they'll be playing behind that, being able to run free. And then if guys know what they're doing, then you can, what goes on in the playbook in terms of higher volume, in terms of stunts and games and different looks. Can they get into that without confusing yourself? That remains to be seen. But a chance for the number 110 defense in the country to possibly being a quality defense this year would be one of the stories in the Big Ten that no one's really expecting, except people maybe in East Lansing.
The other thing I think is pretty interesting is going back to defensive backs in the safety position. Mm-hmm. With Malik Spencer, you got Tatum as a corner, and then you've got Jaden Mangum as a safety. And Hazelton said something interesting today about those guys, those sophomores that got soaked in reps and kind of got thrown into the fire, that they're starting to hold each other accountable and starting to be more vocal. And that's another big development, as they go along, because we talked about as many bodies as they have at defensive back. Where's the leadership going to come from? And it's good to see those guys stepping up a little bit.
And that's the one area where they don't have depth is safety. You have Mangum and Spencer there, a couple of true sophomores. You bring in Amarion Smith, transfer from Cincinnati. Other than that, Harold Joyner was a second-string safety in the spring. Today he was playing as a linebacker today.
Justin White.
Yeah, and he's been around. He's undersized.
Yeah,
if you're playing with him and Khalil Majid,
exactly.
If you're playing with those guys, then you can't have thin ice anywhere on defense.
Exactly.
So my concern would be those 2 safeties, the young guys, and staying healthy back there. That's one thing that could pull the chair out from the whole thing.
One thing I think, and I know people don't want to hear this, but and it wouldn't be an ideal situation, but I feel like going back to the Dylan Tatum, you talk about competition at corner. I think he feels like his best position long term is nickel, and I think that's what he wants to play. Michigan State has Angelo Gross at nickel right now. He struggled at safety in the past, but that is at least one card that they could possibly play. Sean Brown, the guy that we were just talking about a second ago, he switched from safety early in his career, where he was pretty good, to corner during his last varsity season. He's a bigger dude. He's got bigger size, but obviously you don't want a true freshman necessarily playing safety. We saw that last year. It'll be interesting to see if there are some guys that make kind of like a sneaky move over there, or they cross-train, because we talk about all this improved depth. You're right. Safety is the one position where there's really not improved depth.
All right. Anything else, Paul? All right. It's glad to have everybody with us here with the VCast. For Paul Konyndyk, Jim Comparoni, we will be continuing to cover August camp. I think next Monday there'll be interviews again. We'll see what is said after the scrimmage on Saturday. Not expecting any press releases about what takes place on Saturday. There'll be some video released. They'll keep that close to the vest, but we'll be watching it and keeping an eye on that and giving you our analysis and our reports from here in East Lansing. So for Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from Spartan Stadium with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.